Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever to everyone who is joining.
Hello everyone.
And I have dropped the link to the agenda doc in the chat as people join. If you wouldn't mind just putting your name in, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. I always feel like I should have some sort of like script, like just prepared content to vamp for 5 minutes when people watch the YouTube video later. Nothing like sitting there watching 5 minutes of silence.
Do you have the ability to edit the videos after and just cut out that bit?
I do, but then I have to go back. So the problem is I when I upload them, I use the caption file that Zoom generates and it has all the timings in it. So if I were to edit out the beginning, I'd have to go through and like retime all of the captions, um, which, is maybe worthwhile, maybe not. I don't know. People do watch the YouTube videos, and maybe they'd watch them more if we didn't have the 5 minutes of silence, but I don't know.
Seems like there ought to be a technological mechanism to make that easier.
Honestly, I could probably write like a little Python script that if I say start at this point, it'll just go through and like find it and do the math to subtract out. Now, if we got to, the point where we're doing like, there's 20 seconds of silence here, I want to cut that out too. Um, that would just be a lot. So, but yeah, maybe I'll look and see because I've never actually looked at the caption file to see how parsable it would be for like an hour's worth of scripting. So,
It also seems like something that I've heard of AI applications that can do highlight reels of a meeting, and maybe that would be a more consumable mechanism
maybe,
that would cut out white space.
yeah, that's worth looking into. But speaking of meetings, it's 6 after, so let's go ahead and get started. Um, I think everyone has listed in the attendees who is here now, so I'll go ahead and get started. And this is the uh, monthly GUAC community meeting for February 20th, 2025. As a reminder, this meeting is recorded and will be posted to the GUAC YouTube channel. This is an OpenSSF project meeting, so it is subject to the OpenSSF Code of Conduct and the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. Before we get into the heart of the matter, anyone who is new here or hasn't been here in a while, would you like to quickly introduce yourselves?
Happy to go first. Craig Pierce, Amazon Web Services. Yeah, general passion for software supply chain security. And I was geeking out with GUAC and Sigstore and a few things the last couple of days. So good to see a community meeting so close to when I was using the tools.
Hey, Craig,
That's
it's been a
awesome.
few years.
Great to
Hi.
see you, Ria. It's been a while.
I know. So I'll go next. I'm Ria Farrell Shelnott. I am at Hewlett Packard Enterprise in the Open Program Office there. I specifically reached out to Ben because of an interest in a particular utility in GUAC and the association with Clearly Defined that I was experimenting with recently. So looking forward to discussing that as well as just learning more about GUAC because it's been on my periphery for a while and I just would like to understand how to better leverage it.
Oh, welcome. I'm glad you could make it. Um, Anyone else
I could go next.
new
Hi,
or
everyone. This is Arnav. I work at Akamai, and I think, yeah, similar to Craig, I have a generalist interest in the software supply chain and what Quark's been doing. It's been on my radar for a while. I think I did attend a couple of Quark meetings, like maybe a few months ago. Then life and work got in the way, so haven't really been following. So.
oh, I'm glad you're back. And for all of you, if anytime you have questions, please do ask in the channel or open issues and stuff. We love to see that people are playing around with GUAC, finding it useful, helping us find places where the documentation could be improved, things like that. So obviously, the more we see folks around, the more motivated we are to continue uh, improving the project. So speaking of which, we've only had one sort of majorish release since last month's meeting, GUAC version 0.13.0. Couple also bug fixes released since then. The main feature there is adding support for open telemetry. I think we already had some support for another maybe Prometheus metrics in there. Unfortunately, Jeff, who implemented this, is out of the office this week. But Parth or any of the other maintainers, anything you want to add on this feature in particular?
I think it's just quite being the open standard is a good way of getting some of the login information out that that you may require from an audit perspective and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the main goal for that. Besides that, the main goals that we've been kind of doing since the last community meeting is we've been working with Dijon, who's on the call here. We've been discussing some of the how do we kind of move. Well, let me back up a little bit. So we're working on how to get to a 1.0. So what features and all those kind of things we should move to a 1.0. So we're discussing that as well as some remaining tasks. So we're pretty close to getting some of that kind of stuff done and being close to getting it ready for a 1.0 kind of release. So that's been going on in the background, and at the same time, past 1.0, be thinking about how can we make this easier for users to pick up and use, making some kind of design changes and all that kind of stuff. So in the background, as like a GUAC 2.0, we've been designing some of that stuff out along with the help of Dijon, and the project, the open source project they have called Trustification from that's been created by Red Hat. So working through that. Another thing we're doing with the some of the folks from Microsoft who are on the call is they've been asking about, and they have an issue that's open here, and I can link it in chat. Basically, they have a unique case, which is maybe not so unique, but they want to be able to unify SBOM representation across multiple image references. So it's if they're copying the, they're mirroring their registries, right? Image registries in multiple different locations. So they want to keep the SBOM, keep all the information, the signatures, all that kind of stuff valid across as they kind of replicate. So how do they do that, and how do they capture that kind of information? Keep it correlated in GUAC. So if they're looking at one artifact, they can see that, okay, this is the same artifact that was in registry A as well as registry B. So there's an open PR that's Robert, who again is not on the call, I've been working on, and there's like a diagram if people are interested, that kind of high level, oops, that's kind of huge, but high level of kind of what we're kind of talking about. And again, still in the working phase about how they want to get this information in there. So those are some of the highlights and ongoing works.
All right, thank you, Parth. Any other questions or comments on recent or upcoming releases? Alrighty. The next item on the agenda is a FOSDEM recap. Unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, Jeff, who had a talk at FOSDEM, is out of the office, and Marco and Brandon, who had talks at FOSDEM, had a last-minute conflict come up. But Mike Lieberman also had a talk, and so he can give a recap of that and just talk about FOSDEM in general and what sort of software supply chain conversations were happening in Brussels.
Yeah. So on the Friday before FOSDEM officially, at one of they call it the fringe events, Jeff and I were out there. There was a lot of there was an SBOM fringe event where there was a lot of discussion on Cyclone DX, SPDX, a lot of discussion around like things are really starting to hit a critical mass around SBOMs. And now the focus is less on how do I generate these things? What do these things even look like? And more like, hey, I have SBOMs. I need to do something with these things. And so there was a lot of focus on how can we get more tools to output data that can integrate with SBOMs, or to actually take data for analysis for SBOMs. So a lot of interesting conversations around the GUAC space there. So that was on the Friday. A lot of good conversations again on like things like, hey, if I have all of this data from SBOMs, what can I do to then analyze it to better understand both the breadth of my environment and my ecosystem? So like what software I have installed and whether there might be vulnerabilities or scorecard issues or license issues, as well as over time, things like hey, I have version 1 of a thing, I installed version 2 of a thing, here's the differences in the dependencies, here's the differences in the software, here's the differences of, hey, we included some new license in the dependency, this now changes the risk in some way. So there was a bunch of conversations on that there. There was also the actual what was I gonna say? On Sunday when they actually had the SBOM sort of event. So Brendan also couldn't make that one either because he got sick. But Marco was there, talking about some of these things. Jeff had a very good talk on clearly defined and how generally, we're using SBOMs and clearly defined, and how do we integrate it into what we're doing. especially in GUAC. And then I had a talk. My talk was on essentially if tools like GUAC are the end goal, where you have full end-to-end observability into your supply chain. How do you get there, right? You don't necessarily want to spin up all this infra on day 0 or day 1. It could be a little annoying. So pretty much just talking through how you could use tools like JQ. You could write a shell script. You can use something like DuckDB or some of these other tools that you can run locally on your laptop with no issue to deal with I have 1 to, let's say, 20 SBOMs. And then when you're like, hey, I have 100 SBOMs, now let me look at stuff like dependency track, things like GUAC a little bit more deeply, and how that can help you in analyzing your software supply chain. Oh, and there was also some discussions a little bit before I forget on the CRA. So for folks who are concerned with the Cyber Resilience Act in the EU, there was some conversations a bit about SBOMs at FOSDEM, and also potentially how the tools like GUAC can help folks better understand the risk and their compliance to things like the upcoming requirements for the CRA.
Quick question, Michael. Are there any artifacts that came out of that Fringe event or resources listing pros and cons of various toolings that people had experienced?
So I need to ask Philippe. He said he was taking pictures because pretty much the way that it worked was we went up on whiteboards and drew a bunch of stuff up, and we did a bunch of stuff there. He said he was uploading essentially the notes and everything else and digitizing everything. I need to double check what the status is, and I can get back to you.
Awesome, thank you.
But yes, the idea is there will be, if there are not artifacts, there will be.
Okay. And for the talks themselves, the FOSDEM crew is also always very fast. So all of them are now, within a few days of presentations, they were uploaded. And so I do have links in the doc to all the talks if you want to go back and actually watch the recordings. Anything else on FOSDEM before we move on to the next topic? Alrighty. So I asked Rhea if she'd be willing to present. We had, as she mentioned, she's had some discussion about, using GUAC and clearly defined to help with license compliance. And so I was like, it'd be good to have a high bandwidth discussion about her use case and needs and where GUAC has been helpful and where it could be more helpful. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to you, Rhea.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Ben. So my interest in coming here hinged off of 2 meetings, one which was presented by Ben at the CISA community meeting. CISA has been running a number of community meetings for the past 2 years, maybe, related to SBOM generation with an obvious focus on security, but there's also a broader story about license compliance in there because license compliance may become an operational risk or a security risk, particularly if certain licenses don't align with your corporate policies or your appetite for those particular obligations in those licenses, especially in the advent of some open source projects going from more permissive licensing to source available licensing or even other more copyleft oriented licensing. So that particular seminar really opened my eyes into how clearly defined could be more scalable in terms of an information resource. I'd been aware of clearly defined in the past and looked at it, but I hadn't really been able to envision how this could potentially scale on a day-to-day basis to provide meaningful input to my process. In addition to the meeting that Ben presented at for CISA, I also, within a 2-week span of time, attended an SPDX general meeting under the Linux Foundation that featured another tool called Sneak Parlay. It's developed by Sneak, a commercial company, and Parlay is the open source tool that they developed. Their backend does not rely on clearly defined. And let me just put the link for the Parlay tool in there. They rely on a different information backend. I personally like the clearly defined, or I feel like I've vetted it more and have more confidence in it. I'm not as familiar with the data backend that's being used by Parlay. But what Parlay does have is a really nice feature that will ingest an SBOM and then spit out as output an SBOM that has been decorated with the data that it has pulled from their data backend. It's a resource called ecosystems or ecosystem.ms. There's a dot between the E and the MS at the end of the word. That is really interesting to me as a way to help with reducing the level of no assertions that I consistently see in SBOMs for analysis. And that happens although we use a number of different tools, some of which we pay for, some of which are open source, but we still end up with no assertions for some of the licenses in components that we're assessing. And that means dev teams have to either script to pull that information out and decorate their own SBOMs, or there's just manual brute force involved in coming up with those licensing metadata. If there was a way to take GUAC 1 and the ability to ingest an SBOM and then query that using the GUAC 1 facility to then also decorate the SBOM or spit out a decorated SBOM, much like Parlay does, that would be a really amazing use case to help reduce the number of no assertions. And I did a mini test where I took some SBOMs, and one in particular had 35 no assertions in it. Using GUAC 1 and querying on a package by package basis, I was able to take that down to 25 no assertions. So that is a material improvement over what we had previously had. And I thought that was really amazing, but I want something more scalable. Unfortunately, that's not my skill set to design that type of thing. And I want to encourage others in HPE to help with this. I would love to get more engagement on a day-to-day basis on the coding and contributions to this project now that I see the vision laid out. But I wanted to see if this is something that GUAC would consider or would be interesting to your wider community.
So yeah, I think that's definitely very interested in that, and we're very happy to hear that the clearly defined stuff actually hit the goals that we hope they would hit. So one of the things that I think there's like some open questions about, like, quite literally where that feature lands, like whether it's an integration with another tool. So for example, in OpenSSF, there's another tool called bombctl or bomb control, which is supposed to be a tool to like update and whatever. And one of the things that they had talked about was they want to be able to essentially be the tool for enriching SBOMs, but with an integration into tools like GUAC. So you can say, hey, I want to now update this SBOM with all the information from GUAC and pull that all in. Whereas GUAC 1 maybe is just purely like, hey, I'm building out integrations into all sorts of stuff and that sort of thing. So exactly where it lives is, I think, a little bit up for debate, but the actual integration into GUAC and having that feature live somewhere, where again, whether it's GUAC enrich or whatever, like where it's like a CLI tool specifically for that, whether it's GUAC 1, whether it's an integration into, hell, even Parlay or whatever, I think is up for debate. But as far as the actual thing of like, do we want this a bit more standardized? Absolutely. And we would love to work with folks from HP to sort of figure that out, to help figure some of this out.
Yeah, I agree with Mike's points. I think uh, the goal for GUAC was always to like, can we take all this information you get from SBOMs or some, any other kind of data source, and can you add other things from the outside to make it better, right? So it's always trying to learn more information. So the more and more data you feed it, the better picture you get, right? And then taking this information and if you want to put this back into an SBOM so you can give it to your customers or whoever the end user is, right? I think that's definitely a use case we want to support.
That is definitely something we're interested in, particularly even aside from, having to do our own internal diligence on our own stuff. We get a lot of stuff from vendors, obviously, and we'll get SBOMs from them. And sometimes those are full of no assertions. Now, because of the need to pass along their cryptographically signed SBOM, we're not going to be able to modify their SBOM that we pass through, but we still want to do our own internal analysis of that, and having a way to scale and toolify decorating that SBOM so that, or enriching that SBOM so that we can then use policies to effectively flag the highest risk scenarios or
Right.
where we need to deep dive. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's where GUAC kind of falls in, right? It's like it's taking all that SBOM data and then making it so that it's usable for policies and all those kind of things, right? So the goal for the GUAC project was always to take all this information that's kind of scattered all over the place, right? Put it into in an API into a graph database that it's queryable, and at the same time you can use that for policies. So like you're saying, like, oh, if a vendor is coming in, you just upload their SBOM, it parses it all out, and then it automatically gets blocked. It's like, oh yeah, based on SBOM as well as the information I pulled in from the outside, whether it's codified or whatever else, and I enriched the data. Oh, there's some license issues that should be I need to go back to the vendor about like, hey, this is something that we need to go fix before I start using your product or something, right?
There's a great use case for that too in the context of M&A and due diligence. I see eventually just moving toward due diligence where you're just relying on the potential entity to provide a series of SBOMs and analyze those. So that would be another way to leverage being able to take all those data sources and flag things with policies, et cetera.
Yeah, we have a few folks who, none of them I think public, so can't really give too many details, but we have a few folks who have been using GUAC for that sort of thing of, we can ingest all of our SBOMs into GUAC, we can ingest all the other companies' SBOMs into GUAC, and we can compare the graphs and find out where there are license issues, where there are issues where, just as an example, they're using React, we're using Vue, and they're both just different front-end frameworks that should do the same thing. And it's like, hey, supporting both of those things comes with a cost, or they're on this very new version of a thing, we're on a very old version of a thing, and like, what does that mean from a vulnerability perspective? And having to support two different versions is always a big risk. So yeah, we definitely have some folks who have been playing around with that idea.
The other area for enriching the SBOM that I see, and this is one of the reasons I'm really excited about the clearly defined integration, is that there's a general obligation, particularly with the permissive range of open source licenses, that you provide an attribution document. I have lots of feelings about attribution documents, and what their efficacy is in a package managed world where you have thousands of dependencies and you create an attribution document that nobody reads. But that aside, it is one of the requirements of the licenses to put this attribution document together. So I have a personal goal that I would love to see the SBOM and the attribution document merge together into one machine readable whole. So having an SBOM that could be decorated with things like the license text, because that's one of the requirements of these permissive licenses, that you have to convey the license text, the copyright statements. Again, that's where the clearly defined integration could really help. Those are tangible use cases that I could see the tooling helping to assist with, outside of having to create a document that is kludgy and difficult to read.
That makes 100%. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious for your use case, if producing a new SBOM is necessary, or if, like just having a way for people to query the GUAC database when they need to check the license information.
Just querying. I mean, I used the CLI to get the packages that had no assertions and test, the validity of using the clearly defined backend, and just develop my own comfort with that.
Right.
That was good, although there would need to be more scripting to facilitate this being more automated. And I personally don't have that ability. Whether I would rather not just develop that internally and just use that at HPE. I would rather encourage people to engage in the project and then make that available to everyone, because I think we could all benefit from that tooling. Ultimately, we need to scale and we need to automate and we need to flag things that we most need to be looking into. It's not particularly helpful if I get an SBOM that has 1,000 no assertions in it, if I have to go query the database 1,000 times to flesh out that information and then determine what the risk is organically.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I think that was a goal for GUAC, is like it is to be flexible in terms of the query language, right? I think GraphQL is a bit difficult to use, and that's what we're trying to, we're working through on the 2.0 kind of things that can make it a lot easier for just people to just, pick up and use. But in the meantime, there's a use case around it. It is still relatively easy. Like once you understand how GraphQL kind of works, you can still pull this information out. So you're not querying one by one. You can get like, hey, based off this SBOM, or based off this, whatever project you have, tell me if I have any issues associated with it, right? So it's fairly straightforward to do. It's like you said, I think you just need to it's very flexible in the way you can query the data, but you just have to know how to query the data in a way that you can use it for compliance and whatever else you want to do. So if that is a use case, we could definitely, like if your team is something, if they want to help out with, we can definitely talk through it more and help out with it if needed.
It's an idea, although I will say, I'm working with a lot of legal professionals in assessing these SBOMs, and I don't necessarily see that they're going to pick up learning how to do GraphQL. So I need an easier mechanism. A lot of times what I'm doing is I'm taking those SBOMs, I'm converting them into Excel spreadsheets, and then they can sort them based on their appetite for risk and filter them within a mode that they're more familiar with. So that's where I'm interested in getting the enriched SBOM, because then I can convert that and they can use that for their analysis in a medium that they're more comfortable with, basically. I mean, ultimately, being able to apply a policy to an SBOM and just have it spit out, here are your 3 areas of risk, and just follow up on those is great, but we need some intermediate steps to build that level of trust and confidence in the system before we can jump to running a marathon.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And obviously some of these things we can take offline in chat and whatever, to talk a little bit more about, because I think the thing that we're always trying to figure out is yeah, like the API is super useful when you're building the integrations, but for folks who are just like, no, I just need to use the SBOM, I need to use the data, I don't want to have to learn GraphQL, REST, I don't have to do, I want the spreadsheet. We're trying to kind of figure out who we can, start to work with to understand what some of those things are, bring in folks from the community and say, hey, there is an engineer who wrote the script that takes the GUAC stuff and converts it to a CSV, or takes the GUAC stuff, merges it with an SBOM, and here's a new SBOM. Because again, I think one of the other use cases, which is tied to what you said, you don't want to modify SBOMs you've received from other people. But one of the things that we've seen as well is, hey, I'm generating an SBOM that has this information in it. But before I release this to my customers, I want to make sure that I'm checking with clearly defined, I'm checking, I'm enriching it with the scorecard information so I can hand my customer a really rich SBOM with a bunch of data, so they're not going to constantly be pinging me with, "Hey, we detected something that seems inconsistent here." It's like, "Hey, no, here's the SBOM." I think, yeah, I think on that end, definitely interested to kind of chat through that again. I think we could sit here for hours going through some of the use cases and how this might actually work. But I think definitely a follow up with the rest of the GUAC community to really dive in there and see. Again, I don't know who's going to be doing the hands-on keyboard work, but we should sit down and chat through that.
Awesome. I'm excited about it.
And
Thank
just
you
to
for the
jump
time
in,
today.
yeah, sorry, just to jump in, it sounds like some of that could be a good way to extend GUAC Visualizer. I think currently it's doing more so dependency tree mappings and such, but yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely been something that's on the list. So the challenge here is all the engineers on GUAC are backend engineers. We are all very well aware of how to build APIs and do database, all that stuff. But you start to ask us to build front-end visualizations, and it's really not our expertise. So if there are folks who are like, again, I don't know if it's React, Vue, and these other things who can maybe help out with some of those things to build some of those like visualizations, like whether it's a table or whatever, we're definitely interested. Dayan.
Yeah, well, shameless plug, but towards working to WAC 0.0 and what we do in Trustify and Trustification is actually that having like a nice UI, we figure out a lot of these use cases of like what information do you want to search and see for the SBOMs, for the vulnerabilities, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully we will be able to donate some of these things to be like a UI, one of the UIs for GUAC in the future. Just to add one thing, like talking with our product manager lately, like you can see like what we're discussing here, like we can see different profiles of people using this information. So starting with like people who want something instead of the Excel, right? Or towards the people who are used to scripting and things like that. So more like a data analyst and things like that. So how do you cater for both? That will be the challenge, I think, for the next couple of years, like how to create something easy to use and also something that's powerful enough for advanced users to really dig into the data when they need to do so. Yeah.
Would it be helpful at this stage for me to open an issue on this subject, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
All right. And in terms of, so this would be an enhancement. In terms of casting this, should I refer to the Parlay tool as a model for potentially how this would work, or is this something that I don't know if, Ben, if you looked at the Parlay tool already, if this is something that just doesn't align well and it's just more conceptual of an issue?
I looked at it briefly. I would say, like there are things we might learn from how they've implemented it. So yeah, definitely, sort of include the, the things that, you've seen from it that are helpful and, also not, so that, that kind of helps frame the conversation a little bit.
That sounds good. I mean, I love that you guys use clearly defined. I mean, I really think that's a solid source of information. Eventually, there may be other repositories of information that would be worth pulling from. So even having a menu of what type of information you have vetted and chosen as I like this information, and being able to integrate that as the information backend, giving people those options would be ideal at some future state probably, because I think this is still a fairly immature industry.
Yeah, I think one of the integrations we did recently, Ben, was the end of life also. So getting end of life information added in, so that it's like again, this getting the information into the graph. So again, you can make more decisions about it. But if that's something that's useful, so it's always we're always looking for more integration points. Like how do we make this data better, right? So they can use it for policies. And then it is a pick and choose, so you can enable and disable these things. So like if it's like, oh, I care about clear and defined, I care about end of life. Like you don't have to have them running. Like it's up to you to choose and like, okay, I want this running, not running, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe there's useful, like I haven't looked at ecosys.ms very much, but there might be uh, that might be another service that we can have a collector for that would, you know, enrich the graph a little bit further. So
Yeah, I'm just not very familiar with it, so I haven't vetted the data in there, so I can't speak to the quality or consistency, completeness of that data. I mean, in any data repository, it's going to be how complete is the data, because end of life is fantastic as an integration, but it's everybody putting that metadata out there about their components to even pull that data in and decorate the SBOM with.
right. All right. Anything else on this topic? All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to come talk to us, Ria. This has been really helpful and very good to hear from you and, learn a little bit more about what you're doing and what you'd like to do. I think we've got some good ideas here.
Fantastic. I appreciate you all listening.
So that brings us to the end of the planned agenda. We do have a few minutes if anyone has any last minute brilliant ideas of things we should discuss.
I'll ask a complete newbie question, particularly since I am relatively new to GUAC, this being my first meeting.
Mhm.
I'm curious, just looking at the issue list, are there specific first time, and I see some bug labels in the issue list, but I don't know if there's specific things that if there are hooks for me to try to engage my dev community in to say, hey, here's a discrete project that would let you get your toes wet on the GUAC project. Do you have something like first time issues, or would the
Yeah.
bug ones be the best ones to look at?
Um, I'm not sure how good we are at like curating this. But I just dropped a link into the chat, and it's also at the top of the community page on guac.sh. But there's a GitHub search across all of the projects in the guacsec repo that have good first issue or help wanted tags. Um,
Excellent.
I'm a big believer in the, scratch your own itch way of getting started. So, if there's something that looks interesting to somebody, like, oh yes, this is a bug that I'm facing or a feature I wish it had, then like that's the best place for them to start. Um, and yeah, in general, um, all help is welcome. So, however people want to join in, we will gladly have them. All right. Anything else? Alrighty, then I guess we'll close out a few minutes early. The usual reminders of upcoming events. These are all in the OpenSSF, well, mostly on the OpenSSF calendar for details. We do have our weekly maintainer meetings on Mondays. Those are open to the entire community. The next community meeting, because February and March are in lockstep most years, will be Thursday, March 20th. And then KubeCon Europe is coming up. Michael Lieberman has a keynote there. Jeff Mendoza and Mike also have talks. Um, Several of us will be there representing our various employers in booths. So if you will be in London in the beginning of April, then please come by, say hi, get some stickers, things like that. If you have upcoming events that you're speaking at, especially if they are GUAC related, but even if they're not, please do share those with the community so we can support each other and be aware of what's going on. And with that, I thank everyone for taking the time this month, and we'll see you next month, if not sooner. We're always around on Slack and in our weekly maintainer meetings. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Folks.